Before we start tonight's episode, just a quick reminder. What we talk about here is about patterns, habits, and the culture we're all living in, not about attacking individuals. These conversations are meant to challenge ideas, not people. If something we say feels familiar or hits close to home, that's not judgment. It's part of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. Because culture doesn't just happen around us, we participate in it. So tonight isn't about outrage or blame. It's about awareness, asking better questions, thinking a little deeper, and understanding how the world around us might be shaping how we think, act, and respond.
Let me ask you something. Have you ever posted something and then found yourself checking it a few minutes later to see how it was doing, then maybe again 10 minutes after that, maybe an hour later? Not because you needed to, but because part of you was curious. Who saw it? Who liked it? Did it land? And if it didn't, maybe you thought about deleting it. Maybe you wondered if it was dumb. Maybe you questioned whether you should have posted it at all. That's a strange shift when you really stop and think about it, because it's not just about sharing anymore. It's about feedback. It's about approval. It's about whether something counts based on how other people react to it. And I'm not judging that. We all do it to some degree. But somewhere along the way, something subtle changed. We didn't just start sharing our lives. We started measuring them. Measuring reactions, measuring validation, measuring worth in likes, comments, views, and engagement. And the question tonight isn't whether social media is good or bad. It's this: when did validation from strangers start mattering so much? This is Friday's Culture Check. And tonight we're asking, if no one sees it, does it still matter? All right, let's bring in the crew. Because if we're going to talk about validation, approval, and whether modern life has turned into one big feedback loop, this is the group you want in the room. It's Friday, which means the energy is a little looser, the takes are a little sharper, and the goal isn't to win an argument. It's to figure out what's actually happening in the culture around us. First up is Brian. If there's a cultural trend that looks like people chasing approval instead of building confidence, he's going to call it out. Brian brings that MAGA Fire Friday energy, and tonight he's looking at whether we've created a world where people care more about being liked than being real, and what that does to discipline, identity, and self-worth over time. Rachel's here as well, bringing the balance like always. When things start leaning too far in one direction, she's the one who pulls it back and reminds us there's usually more going on under the surface. Rachel looks at the psychology behind these trends, how validation works, why people seek it, and whether this shift is actually harmful or just a natural part of living in a connected world. Daniel is in the building, which means we're going to hear about systems, incentives, and algorithms. If people are chasing validation, his question is always the same: who benefits from that behavior? Because platforms don't just host content, they shape it. And tonight he's looking at whether the entire system is designed to keep people seeking approval in ways that keep them engaged. And Skylar is back with the perspective that keeps this conversation honest. She's going to challenge the idea that all validation seeking is negative and push back on whether some of this is actually about connection, expression, and community in a digital world that didn't exist before. And then there's me. I'm not here to referee. I'm here to ask the uncomfortable questions and see where this conversation actually goes. It's Friday, it's Culture Check. Let's get into it. All right, let's start here. We live in a time where almost everything we do can be seen, reacted to, and measured. You post a photo, a thought, a video, even just a moment from your day, and within seconds it gets feedback, likes, comments, views, shares. And over time, whether we realize it or not, that feedback starts to shape behavior. You notice what performs, what gets attention, what people respond to, and naturally, you lean into it. And again, I'm not saying that like it's all bad. Humans have always responded to feedback. We've always cared what people think. But the difference now is scale. It's not just your family, your friends, or your immediate circle anymore. It's hundreds, sometimes thousands of people reacting in real time. And when that becomes the environment you live in, it's easy for validation to shift from something that feels good to something that starts to feel necessary. And that's where the question starts to matter. Because when validation becomes constant, it can also become something people rely on, not just to share their lives, but to measure them, to decide what matters, what's good, what's worth doing. So let's start there. Rachel, I'll come to you first. When did validation from strangers start mattering this much? And is that actually changing how people see themselves?
I think it's less about a single moment and more about gradual normalization. The more people use platforms that provide instant feedback, the more that feedback starts to feel like part of everyday life. Over time, it becomes less about sharing something because it has meaning to you and more about anticipating how it will be received by others. That shift is subtle, but it's powerful. And psychologically, humans are wired to respond to approval. Positive feedback releases dopamine, which reinforces behavior. So when someone posts something and receives a lot of engagement, it creates a loop. They're more likely to repeat that behavior, sometimes without even realizing it. That doesn't make people shallow, it makes them human. But it does mean that external validation can start to carry more weight than internal judgment if it's not balanced.
That idea of a feedback loop is interesting because once it starts, it kind of feeds itself. The more you get used to that response, the more you start expecting it. And when it's not there, it feels different. Not necessarily devastating, but noticeable. Brian, let me bring you in here. Is this just human nature adapting to new technology, or are we raising a culture that depends on approval to feel confident?
I think we're absolutely creating a culture that leans on approval way more than it should. And look, I get what Rachel's saying about human nature. We all like positive feedback. That's normal. But there's a difference between appreciating validation and needing it to feel good about yourself. What I see now is people second guessing everything unless it gets reinforced online. They post something, and if it doesn't get traction, they start questioning whether it was worth posting at all. That's backwards. Your value shouldn't be determined by how many strangers tap a screen. And I think it goes deeper than just social media. When you build a habit of looking outward for approval, you stop developing internal confidence. You stop trusting your own judgment. You start asking, is this good, instead of deciding it for yourself. And over time, that creates people who are more concerned with being liked than being solid.
That shift from internal confidence to external approval, that's a big one. Because once you start outsourcing how you feel about yourself to other people, you're kind of handing over control without realizing it. And the tricky part is, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, checking reactions, adjusting behavior, noticing what gets attention. Skylar, let me bring you in here. Is this really a loss of confidence, or is it just a new form of connection where people are naturally looking for feedback in a more connected world?
I think it's a mix of both, but I lean more toward connection than collapse. Humans have always looked for feedback. It's how we learn, how we bond, how we understand where we fit. What's changed is that now the feedback isn't limited to a small circle. It's immediate, constant, and amplified. So, of course, it feels more important. And I don't think that automatically means people are less confident. For a lot of people, especially younger generations, sharing online is how they build community. It's how they find people with similar interests, similar struggles, similar experiences. Validation, in that sense, isn't just approval, it's recognition. It's someone saying, I see you. And that can be powerful. Where it becomes an issue is when that recognition turns into dependency, when someone doesn't feel comfortable unless they're getting that feedback, or when silence feels like rejection. That's when the line starts to blur between healthy connection and needing constant reinforcement.
That distinction between connection and dependency is interesting because the behavior can look the same on the surface. Posting, sharing, checking reactions, it all looks normal. But underneath it, the motivation can be completely different. One person is sharing to connect, another is sharing to feel validated. And the hard part is, most people probably sit somewhere in the middle, a little bit of both. Daniel, let me bring you in here. Is this just human behavior scaling with technology? Or are these platforms actually designed to keep people chasing validation because it keeps them engaged?
They're absolutely designed around that loop. Engagement is the core metric, and validation is one of the most effective ways to drive it. When someone posts and receives feedback, it creates anticipation. That anticipation brings them back to the platform. The platform doesn't just host that behavior, it reinforces it. And the systems are constantly optimizing for it. Notifications, badges, like counts, comment alerts, all of it is designed to create small moments of reward. Over time, those rewards train behavior. People learn what gets engagement, and they adjust accordingly, Not consciously all the time, but gradually. So what you end up with is a system where validation isn't just a byproduct. It's a driver. The more people seek it, the more they engage. The more they engage, the more valuable they are to the platform.
So it's not just happening, it's being reinforced, which means the environment itself is nudging people toward that behavior over and over again. And when something is constantly rewarded, it doesn't take long before it starts to feel normal, even necessary. Rachel, let me bring you back into ground this. Is the validation economy something we should actually be worried about, or is this just the natural evolution of communication in a digital world?
I don't think it's something to panic about, but it is something to be aware of. Every form of communication changes behavior. Letters did, phones did, email did. Social media is just faster and more visible. The difference now is how measurable everything is. When reactions are quantified, people naturally start paying attention to those numbers. The key is balance. External feedback can be useful as it can help people connect, learn, and grow, but it shouldn't replace internal judgment. People still need a sense of identity that isn't dependent on how others respond in real time. So the validation economy isn't inherently harmful. It just becomes a problem when people lose the ability to separate who they are from how they're received.
That might be the line right there. Not whether validation exists, but whether it defines us. Because feedback has always been part of being human. The difference now is how constant it is and how easy it is to start relying on it without even realizing it. So maybe the culture check question isn't just, do we want validation? It's, do we still know who we are without it? All right, let's take a quick break. Because if validation is driving behavior, there's probably an entire system built around keeping that cycle going.
Tonight's episode of Data and Dissonance is brought to you by Validate Me, the world's first subscription service designed to make sure you never have to feel uncertain about yourself ever again. Post something online and not getting enough likes? Feeling ignored? Questioning your worth for more than 5 seconds? Don't worry, Validate Me has you covered. With our basic plan, you'll receive instant likes on every post, pre-written comments like, "You're amazing," and "This is everything," and a confidence boost notification every 10 minutes reminding you that you're crushing it. But wait, upgrade to Validate Me Pro and we'll even filter out negative feedback entirely so you never have to experience disagreement again. And for our premium users, we introduce Reality Plus, where every opinion you have is automatically confirmed as correct. Because why build self-confidence when you can subscribe to it? Validate Me. If they don't like it, we will.
All right, joking aside, let's take this one step further, because if validation is driving behavior, there's another layer to this conversation that might matter even more. What happens when people stop trusting themselves altogether? Think about how often people second guess themselves now. Not just big decisions, small ones, what to post, what to say, how something will be received, whether something is good enough before it even goes out. And part of that makes sense. When everything is visible and everything gets feedback, people naturally become more aware of how they're perceived. But there's a line where awareness turns into hesitation, where instead of trusting your own judgment, you start waiting for approval, where instead of deciding something is good, you wait to see if other people agree. And when that becomes the habit, confidence starts to shift from something internal to something external. So here's the question. Brian, I'll start with you. Are we losing the ability to trust our own judgment because we're so used to getting feedback from everyone else?
Yeah, I think we are. And I don't even think it's subtle anymore. You can see it in how people hesitate before doing anything that might be judged. They don't just act, they pre-think how it's going to land. Will people like this? Will this get pushed back? Is this safe to say? And that constant filtering starts to chip away at confidence because you're no longer operating off what you believe. You're operating off what you think will be accepted. And the problem with that is confidence is built by making decisions and standing by them, not by testing them out in front of a crowd first. If every move has to be validated before it even happens, you never actually develop that internal sense of certainty. You're always waiting for the green light from someone else, and over time that turns into dependency whether people realize it or not.
That hesitation piece is real because it's not always obvious. It's not like people are stopping completely. They're just adjusting constantly, tweaking, filtering, second guessing in small ways that add up over time. Skylar, let me bring you in here. Is that hesitation a problem? Or is it just people being more thoughtful because they know their words and actions reach a wider audience now?
I think some of that hesitation is actually awareness, and awareness isn't a bad thing. People are more conscious now that what they say can reach beyond their immediate circle, and that can lead to more thoughtful communication. Like, that's not necessarily a loss of confidence. Like, it's an adjustment to a more connected environment. But there's definitely a tipping point when awareness turns into fear, fear of being judged, misunderstood, or criticized. That's when it starts limiting people. If someone is constantly editing themselves to avoid negative feedback, they're not really, expressing who they are anymore. They're managing perception. So again, it's not the awareness that's the issue. It's when that awareness becomes pressure and pressure turns into self-doubt.
That pressure piece is interesting because it doesn't have to be loud to be effective. It can be quiet, subtle, always in the background, just enough to make someone pause, rethink, adjust. Daniel, let me bring you in. Is that pressure something people are just feeling naturally? Or is it being amplified by the systems we're interacting with every day?
It's definitely being amplified. Platforms don't just show content, they show performance. Every post comes with metrics: likes, views, shares, comments. That turns expression into something measurable. And once something is measurable, it becomes comparable. And comparison is where pressure builds. People see what performs well, what gets attention, what gets approval, and they naturally adjust their behavior toward those outcomes. Again, not consciously all the time, but consistently. So over time, expression becomes optimized, not for authenticity necessarily, but for response. And when that happens, people start trusting the metrics more than their own instincts.
That's a powerful point. When metrics become the reference point instead of instinct. Because once that happens, confidence isn't coming from within anymore. It's coming from performance, from numbers, from reactions. Rachel, let me bring you in to close this out. Are we actually losing self confidence as a culture? Or are we just redefining what confidence looks like in a world where everything is visible?
I don't think confidence is disappearing, but I do think it's being redirected. Instead of being rooted internally, it's increasingly influenced by external feedback. That doesn't mean people are weaker. It means the environment they're operating in is different. Confidence used to develop in smaller, more private contexts. Now it often develops in public, where feedback is immediate and visible. That can accelerate growth, but it can also create instability if someone becomes too reliant on that feedback. So the real challenge isn't whether confidence exists, it's where it comes from. If it's grounded internally, external feedback can enhance it. But if it's built entirely on external validation, it becomes fragile because it depends on something that can change moment to moment.
That word right there, fragile. Not because people are fragile, but because anything built entirely on external input can shift overnight. So maybe the real culture check question isn't just about validation, it's about foundation. What are we building our confidence on? All right, it's Friday. Let's lighten this up a little. Time for the lightning round, because there are a few things happening right now that make you stop and go, wait, this is normal now? All right, let's have a little fun with this. We've talked about validation, confidence, feedback loops, and how the modern world keeps putting everything out in front of an audience. But now it's Friday, so we're going to loosen it up a bit with the lightning round. Three things happening right now that feel completely normal, but if you really stop and think about them, they're kind of wild. Quick reactions, no overthinking, just honest takes. Let's go. First one. People post something, and if it doesn't get enough likes, comments, or views, they delete it. Not because it was wrong and not because it was offensive, just because it didn't perform. When did that become normal? Brian, go.
That one drives me crazy because it's the perfect example of what we've been talking about all night. It's not about whether something is meaningful anymore. It's about whether it gets attention. If it doesn't hit some invisible performance standard, people just erase it like it never happened. That's not expression, that's marketing. And look, if you're running a business page, I get it. Metrics matter. But when regular people start treating their personal lives like content that needs to perform, that's a shift. You're not sharing anymore, you're curating based on approval.
I think part of that comes from how visible everything like is. When you know people can see how something performs, it's hard not to be aware of it. Deleting a post can feel like managing your digital presence, not necessarily chasing validation. But Brian's point still stands. If the only reason you're deleting something is because it didn't get enough attention, then yeah, that says something about how much weight that feedback is carrying.
It also ties back to metrics being public. If performance is visible, it becomes part of the content itself. People aren't just seeing what you posted, they're seeing how it performed. That creates an incentive to remove anything that doesn't meet a certain threshold, because low engagement becomes a signal.
And that's where awareness matters again. There's nothing wrong with managing what you share, but if the decision is entirely driven by numbers, it's worth asking why those numbers matter so much. That's where validation starts to take priority over authenticity.
Round 2. People going online and asking their followers what they should do. What should I wear? Should I take this job? Should I stay in this relationship? When did the internet become a decision-making panel? Skylar, start us off at...
I think for some people it's about community. They're looking for input, perspectives, maybe even reassurance. In a world where people feel more connected online, it makes sense that they'd ask for opinions there. But there's definitely a line. When you start outsourcing major life decisions to people who don't actually know your full situation, that's risky. Advice is helpful, but it shouldn't replace personal judgment.
Yeah, that's where it crosses the line for me. Getting input is one thing, but asking strangers how to live your life is something else entirely. Those people don't know you, they don't know the full context, and they're not the ones dealing with the consequences. At some point, you've got to be able to make your own call and stand on it.
There's also a psychological element. When people are unsure, they look for consensus. The more responses they get, the more confident they feel about a decision. But that confidence is coming from volume, not necessarily accuracy. So again, it's validation influencing action.
And that's where balance comes in. Seeking input isn't a problem. It can actually be helpful. But decisions still require ownership. If someone becomes dependent on outside opinions to make choices, it can weaken their ability to trust themselves over time.
Final one. People apologizing online for everything. Not just mistakes, opinions, jokes, misunderstandings, things that didn't even seem like a big deal at the time. When did constant public apologies become part of everyday life? Daniel, go.
Part of it is the visibility we talked about earlier. When everything is public, mistakes, real or perceived, are also public. That creates pressure to respond quickly and visibly. Apologies become a way to manage that pressure and control the narrative. But over time, it can also create an environment where people feel like they have to apologize preemptively just to avoid potential backlash.
Yeah, and that's where it gets ridiculous. If you're actually wrong, own it. That's fine. But apologizing just because someone might disagree, that's not accountability, that's fear. You end up with people walking on eggshells all the time, and that's not a healthy way to operate.
I think there's a balance here too. Accountability matters, and in some cases, public apologies are appropriate. But when it becomes constant, it can signal that people feel like they're always being evaluated. And living under constant evaluation isn't exactly a recipe for confidence.
Exactly. Accountability and overcorrection aren't the same thing. A healthy culture allows for mistakes, growth, and conversation. When apologies become constant, it can reflect an environment where people feel pressure to manage perception rather than simply be human.
Deleting posts that don't perform, asking strangers how to make life decisions, and apologizing like the whole world is watching. Because sometimes it feels like it is. None of these things are automatically good or bad, but they all point back to the same idea. When everything is visible, everything becomes evaluated. And the real culture check question is, are we still living our lives, or are we performing them? All right, before we wrap this up tonight, let's take a quick look at the merch.
All right, before we close this one out tonight, quick reminder. If you've been rocking with Data and Dissonance, if you like these culture check conversations where we step back and actually look at what's happening instead of just reacting to headlines, you can support the show and represent what we're building at the same time. The Data and Dissonance merch store is live. We've got hoodies, tees, trucker hats, mugs, bumper stickers, all built around the idea of thinking for yourself, asking better questions, and not just going along with whatever the noise of the day is telling you. And of course, we've got the coffee lineup, nikdai. Because let's be honest, half these conversations probably don't happen without caffeine. High Lakes, the light roast, Rock Creek, the medium roast, and Bitterroot, the dark French roast. Strong enough to survive any comment section. If you want to check it out, head over to data-and-dissonance.printify.me/. Wear it, drink it, stick it on your truck. All right, let's bring this one home.
You know, the thing about validation is that it's not new. People have always cared what others think. That's part of being human. We're wired for connection, for feedback, for belonging. The difference now is that validation isn't occasional anymore. It's constant, it's measurable. It's always there, sitting in your pocket, waiting to tell you how something landed. And when something becomes constant like that, it doesn't just stay a tool. It starts shaping behavior, not in big, obvious ways, but in small adjustments. What you say, how you say it, what you post, what you hold back. Over time, those small adjustments can add up, and before you know it, you're not just living your life, you're presenting it, measuring it, waiting to see how it's received. And again, none of this makes people weak. It makes people human in a very different environment than we've ever had before. But the question, the real question, is where your foundation is. Because if your confidence is built entirely on reactions, it's going to move every time those reactions change. And in a world where feedback can shift overnight, that's a tough place to stand. But if your foundation is internal, if you know who you are, what you believe, and what matters to you, then validation becomes what it was always meant to be. Something that adds to your life, not something that defines it. That's the balance. Use the tools, engage with the world, connect with people, but don't hand over the steering wheel, because at the end of the day, your life isn't a post. It's something you have to live, whether anyone's watching or not. That's this week's Culture Check. We'll see you next time. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode of Data and Dissonance is brought to you by the stories and the sound behind everything we're building here. If you've been riding with this show and you like conversations about truth, pressure, identity, and standing firm when the world starts pulling in every direction, then you'll want to check out the Caleb Rourke thriller series. It starts with the Covenant Protocol, followed by the Prophet Directive, and continues with Black Echo Rising, all available now on Amazon. These aren't just thrillers, they're stories about conviction, about navigating a world where power, truth, and loyalty collide, and about what it means to hold the line when everything around you is shifting. If you like fast-paced stories with real stakes and deeper meaning underneath, this series was built for you. And if music is more your lane, whether you're on the road, in the gym, or just need something real in your ears, check out the Data and Dissonance music releases, streaming everywhere. The album Uncaged, raw, gritty, and rooted in real-life struggle, written from experience, from war, from personal battles, and from the kind of moments that shape who you become. The newer album, Four Wheelers and Hallelujah, country-driven, grounded in faith, freedom, and the everyday people who keep this country moving forward. And the track Stand Tall, Charlie, a reminder of resilience, backbone, and standing firm when it matters most. Books for the mind, music for the road, and a show built to make you think. We'll see you next episode.